Have you ever felt, just stuck, caught in these cycles of maybe conflict or frustration? That feeling like, despite really trying your best, true peace or understanding just feels out of reach. You try to be good, right, or
Mhm.
honest, but the problems just keep coming up, and often it feels like it's someone else's fault or
Yeah.
just circumstances. Well, today on the deep dive, we're going to unpack some really profound ideas. We're looking at excerpts from Richard W. Wetherill's work, Suppose We Let Civilization Begin, and also some really powerful personal stories from people who actually applied his principles. Our mission, really, is to get our heads around this radical idea that maybe a lot of our struggles stem from a basic flaw in how we think, and then explore, well, a pretty surprising path to a life that could be without fear, conflict, and disappointment. This deep dive, it's definitely going to challenge some assumptions, I think, and offer a unique angle on why we do what we do.
It's a really fascinating premise. Wetherill is essentially suggesting that our big societal issues, you know, wars, economic problems, right down to the little conflicts in our daily lives, they all come from this basic flaw in our thinking.
Yeah.
He calls it a kind of subtle, often totally unseen dishonesty, something he thinks is, well, inborn, and then society just reinforces it.
Okay, so this basic flaw, when Wetherill talks about it, is he just saying we're all fundamentally, bad, or is it more complex than that? It doesn't sound like it's just about obviously bad people doing bad things.
No, not at all. And that's really the key thing here. The source describes this basic flaw not as, like, deliberate malice, but as an inherent dishonesty that comes naturally when we reason from our urges. It's more about individuals or groups, subtly, maybe even unconsciously, grabbing unfair advantages, or taking what they want and then just saying whatever they need to say to get it, without really caring if it's honest or based in reality. The book has some really striking examples. I mean, it points out that the fact we even need laws against stealing and murder, that basically proves we're living in a dishonest, kind of uncivilized society. And murder itself, he reframes it. It's an act of stealing, taking someone's life, but also profound dishonesty. Think about the stealth, the hiding, the denial involved. But what really jumps out, I think, is this idea of unconscious dishonesty. Wetherill actually says people tell lie after lie after lie without even realizing it, misrepresenting why they do things, saying whatever they think will get the result they want, totally disregarding the truth.
Wow, that is a jarring thought that we could be lying and not even be aware of it. And he takes it further, right? Suggesting everyday things, little things, can be this subtle stealing.
Exactly, like demanding a pay raise you haven't really earned. He links that to inflation. Or just imposing on someone's time when you don't need to, or cutting in line.
Things most of us would never think of as stealing.
Right. But he argues that someone operating honestly from reality would see it clearly.
And what's really compelling here is just how, well, pervasive and hidden this unconscious dishonesty might be. The source suggests our comments are often just about making the impression we want to make, not about facts. So the real danger isn't just, avoiding the obvious big lies. It's failing to even understand dishonesty in all its sneaky forms. It gets hidden by our fear of being found out, and we use it to justify things we maybe know deep down aren't right.
Yeah, and this leads him to distinguish between two, as he puts it, diametrically opposite systems of reasoning. First, you've got the relative system of reasoning. That's our normal, everyday way of thinking. It's where we make a conscious effort to be honest. But, and this is the twist, Wetherill argues that this very effort is only necessary because the system itself is inherently dishonest. Our focus stays locked on our urges, our drive to get our own way.
Okay, so trying to be honest is actually a symptom of the problem.
In this view, yes. Because then there's the absolute system of reasoning. Now, imagine a way of living where you don't even try to be honest, because honesty is just what happens naturally. In this absolute system, there's simply no dishonesty, so you don't need any effort to be honest. A person reasons directly from reality. They don't try to get their own way. They just take whatever action is called for by the reality of whatever's happening.
Mhm.
Honesty and dishonesty, as concepts we wrestle with, they sort of become irrelevant because there isn't that internal conflict driven by urges anymore.
So what does this all mean for you, listening right now? Maybe consider if your own efforts to be honest are actually part of this relative system, this struggle. Or could there be this entirely different approach, the absolute system, that might actually free you from these patterns? That absolute system.
It sounds powerful, almost, well, too good to be true. How do we even start to access that? The source says it's built on something called the basic law and the logic of reality. What does that mean?
Exactly. So Wetherill breaks down the laws governing us into three types. First, man-made laws. Rules from parents, teachers, government. Don't touch, pay your taxes. Often things we don't like, and they need someone else to enforce them. Second, self-made laws. These pop up in our own heads. I'll do whatever I want, or maybe I have to be perfect. We enforce these ourselves. They're often irrational, clash with other laws, and, yeah, tend to lead to trouble.
Okay, those two make sense. What's the third? The third is natural or God-made laws. Think gravity, fire burning, electricity shocking. These laws are rational, completely reliable, and crucially, self-enforcing. You can't disobey gravity, right? You jump off something, you're still operating under its rules. If you understand and respect these laws, they provide safety. But if you disregard them, stick your hand in the fire, you get the natural consequence. Trouble.
And what really opened my eyes here was this idea that genuine principles are actually these natural laws. We tend to think principles are, I don't know, scientific things or maybe philosophical ideas, but the source insists they're ever present in nature and they govern everything. Obvious ones like you can't walk through a solid wall, but also less obvious behavioral ones.
Right. And these less obvious behavioral principles, he says, are commonly understood but also commonly disregarded. Like not getting enough sleep damages your health. Everyone knows that, but
But we ignore it. Or antagonizing people leads to arguments. Obvious, right. Or needing to pay attention to avoid accidents. Disregarding these isn't just bad luck. It's like defying a natural law. It inherently brings trouble.
And then, crucially, there are what the source calls counterfeit principles. These are basically those self-made laws we were talking about. They come from our urges, our personal motives, and they flat out ignore reality. Thinking things like, oh, I can get away with this if I'm just careful, or as long as I get what I want, who cares about anything else? Those are counterfeit principles. And the source is really clear. They always lead to trouble and frustration.
That seems like a direct contrast to what he calls real intelligence.
Exactly. Real intelligence, in this view, isn't about being clever and manipulating things. It's described as an impersonal quality that shows up when someone reasons purely from reality, getting beyond that misleading intelligence that's just based on urges.
So this raises a really important question for everyone listening. How might your own self-made laws, your counterfeit principles, be quietly inviting trouble into your life without you even noticing? How could you start to spot these hidden patterns that might be pulling you off course?
Well, the power, according to Wetherill, comes from simply being willing to look squarely at reality. He puts it very directly. Irrationality is the result of disregarding reality. And the solution? The way to achieve rationality is to look directly at the precise reality of whatever's happening and take right action. That's it. That's the formula he gives for a life without fear. Ignoring reality causes problems, but really looking at it, inspecting it closely, that's what prevents trouble and stops those recurring issues because reality itself corrects the urge that contradicts it.
Okay, let's pivot then to the solution that comes out of this. Wetherill calls it the basic plan, and it really seems to boil down to two paths. Keep acting on your urges, which seems to lead nowhere good, or start acting based on reality.
Yeah, the source is pretty blunt about the consequences of acting on urges. It says it leads to compulsions, always wanting more, never being satisfied, and ultimately tragic consequences. It even points to examples like people chasing fame, wealth, high positions, living the dream, but finding their lives often end in disappointment, despair, addiction, even suicide. That constant struggle to fulfill urge-based dreams.
Wow. So the alternative is the natural plan.
Right. The natural plan is simply acting on the impulses that come from reality. And this is seen as fundamentally safe because reality is part of creation. It carries the true authority of the creator, as the source puts it. When someone genuinely makes that shift in their reasoning, the urge is just. They lose their power, their hypnotic grip. And there's this incredible freedom from that constant internal battle.
And the source doesn't just leave it theoretical, does it? It gives some really powerful personal stories, starting with something so many can relate to. Family conflict.
Yeah, one narrator describes this childhood with 7 siblings, constant fighting, everyone jockeying for desired positions, using mom as an ally.
I think I remember the baby, stick your head in gravy taunt mentioned. And just retreating into TV, even stealing stuff for army games as teenagers. It paints a very relatable picture of, well, unconscious conflict.
Absolutely. And then this person learns about command phrases. These are rational thoughts that get lodged in your subconscious when you're emotional.
And the amazing part is, just identifying and deciding to drop these phrases apparently changed everything. Like, their brothers just stopped punching them. That whole punching bag dynamic vanished.
Right. They realize their own internal command phrase, something like, everyone picks on me, was actually inviting the trouble.
Yeah.
Which is a really radical thought. Your inner narrative attracting your outer reality.
And it wasn't just siblings, right? There was a story about relationships too, like with a mother.
Yes. The same narrator talked about a really codependent relationship with her mother initially, always seeking attention, needing that balm, as they called it, and a huge struggle to break free, which leads to this concept of hooks. The subtle or not so subtle ways we try to pull people in, control them through favors, attention, guilt, whatever works, and the frustration when people don't respond to our hooks.
And the narrator mentioned how terrifying it felt to even think about dropping those hooks, fearing the relationship would just collapse.
Exactly, because it feels like the hooks are the relationship. And this connects to an even deeper idea, the trance.
The trance. Tell us about that.
The source says we're essentially born into this trance. It's like a filter that insulates us from reality. It makes us believe unrealistic things about ourselves, about others, like the example given, thinking I should be treated like a queen just because someone told you were pretty or talented as a kid. This trance filters how we see everything and makes us think happiness means propping up these illusions.
Wow. And the narrator describes this astonishing release when they finally saw they were in this trance and decided consciously to act based on reality instead. It changed everything. Their view of home, work, even what happiness felt like.
Yes, a fundamental shift. And this connects to a specific relationship technique from Humanetics, which is the practical application of these ideas. It involves things like looking into someone's eyes with no motives, just looking. And through that, realizing past hurts weren't really caused by the person, but by the clash of contradictory motives between you.
That's a huge shift in perspective.
It is, and it makes it genuinely possible to drop grudges, to drop those hooks, using favors or attention for control. And the definition of love itself changes. It becomes support for right action, not supporting wrong things or being emotionally tied up by someone. And as a result, conflicts were greatly reduced, sometimes just vanished, replaced by understanding, trust, and the shared goal of reasoning from reality.
So, listening to this, what resonates with you? Could these hooks, these command phrases, maybe even a trance, be subtly shaping your relationships, your view of reality? And just imagine, what might it feel like to actually break free from that?
Okay, so taking this even broader, what does it all mean for the bigger picture? The source uses this really interesting analogy, comparing life itself to a series of games.
Right, it uses card games, things like Fish, War, Pinochle, Poker, Bridge, as metaphors for these life games we play. Think about hidden cards in poker. That represents keeping secrets, hiding your real intentions, the better to take advantage.
Okay, I see that.
And it talks about cheating, not just breaking rules, but what it calls mutually agreeable legal cheating. It compares this to things in our modern judicial or economic systems, arguing that even if it's legal, it's still fundamentally dishonest and destructive.
Wow, that's a strong claim. It is. Another analogy is taking credit for random wins. Like in cards, getting a good hand. In life, Wetherill calls this playing creator, acting like we own our abilities, our possessions, everything, and feeling robbed when those credits are lost. Even in games where you have a partner, like Pinochle or Bridge, the goal is often still competition. It's cooperation the better to compete, ignoring, Wetherill says, an inherent immorality in that competitiveness. Yet society tends to praise these competitive skills as constructive.
And the conclusion drawn from this game metaphor is pretty stark, isn't it? Something about clinging to credits and death.
Yes, the source says provocatively that clinging to credits predisposes to the parting by death. It basically argues that this relentless drive to win, to create losers, this insanity, ultimately leads us to annihilate ourselves and each other.
It comes back to that core idea. All our troubles are due to dishonesty that causes insanity. It really paints a bleak picture if we stay in these games.
It does, but it also offers an alternative purpose for life, discovered through Humanetics, which is to use what I have been given to serve the purposes of the prime giver rather than my own. There's this sense of profound relief described when people drop those useless competitive objectives. And the understanding that follows, the source suggests, leads towards a vastly different world, one where these childish, dishonest, competitive, and insane games of life are finally put aside. That's when real civilization can actually begin.
It really makes you think. How are you playing the game of life? Are you focused on competitive advantage, on winning at others' expense? Or could you be striving for a different kind of win, one where maybe everyone gets to thrive? So we've really dug deep today into Wetherill's ideas. We looked at how this inborn, often unconscious dishonesty operating through that relative system of urges can keep us trapped in cycles of conflict and just frustration. But we've also explored the potential for this incredible release that comes from shifting to the absolute system, reasoning from reality, dropping those hidden command phrases and hooks, embracing principles that are just natural laws.
Yeah, the path to what he calls true civilization, both for us as individuals and, globally, it isn't presented as this grim struggle for perfection. It's more about a willingness to understand and apply the simple, self-correcting logic of reality. It really seems to be about letting go of the fantasies, recognizing the trance we might be in, and consciously choosing a life based on what's actually right and true, rather than just what we want.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Just imagine if every single person decided to adopt this absolute honesty, to reason only from reality, understanding that any conflict is, by its nature, wrong by definition. What kinds of global problems, things we see now as totally unavoidable, might just dissolve? What would your life, your relationships, your whole community even look like then?